Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in the schematics archive tasted of recycled oxygen and failure. Kalen knew the flavor intimately. It was the same sterile tang that had filled the med bay after the ambush on Cygnus X-1, the same thin atmosphere that had clung to his uniform as they carried away the pieces of his command. Here, on Gehenna Prime, it was thinner still, laced with the bitter dust of a world being bled dry. He was a compliance officer for the Magna Corps Syndicate, a title that sounded important but meant he was little more than a custodian of blueprints, a ghost haunting the digital remains of a dying planet. His world had shrunk to the dimensions of this room, a sterile white cube buried deep within the geothermal mining facility. Walls lined with data ports hummed with a low, constant thrum, the only companion he tolerated. He preferred the silent, logical certainty of conduit layouts and structural stress simulations to the hollow chatter of the miners and technicians in the upper-level mess hall. They saw him as a relic, a broken soldier put out to pasture. They saw the limp. The cane was his most defining feature, more so than the gray at his temples or the network of faded scars that mapped a history of violence across his face. It was made of hardened plasteel, its grip worn smooth by the constant pressure of his hand. Each step was a measured, deliberate act, a negotiation with gravity and the shrapnel that still slept in the muscle and bone of his left leg. The rhythmic tap of its tip on the grated floor was a constant announcement of his presence, a sound that often drew thinly veiled smirks or condescending glances. He spent his days tracing the facility's veins, cross-referencing outdated plans with the new, reckless additions ordered by Administrator Forlag. The Syndicate was digging deeper, faster, chasing a rich vein of thorium isotopes with a rapacious hunger that bordered on insanity. Kalen saw the consequences in the data. He saw the microfractures spreading through the bedrock, the rising pressure in dormant magma conduits, the subtle seismic tremors that the official sensors were calibrated to ignore. He filed his reports, and his reports were filed away, unread. His duties occasionally required him to inspect the lowest levels, the parts of the facility that gnawed directly into the planet's crust. It was on one such inspection, a routine check of the structural bracings around Containment Sector Gamma, that he first saw it. He had expected to find another piece of industrial hardware, another massive drill or power converter. Instead, he found a prison. In the center of a cavernous, chilled chamber floated a figure, suspended within a shimmering cage of pure energy. It was humanoid in shape, tall and slender, but its body was not made of flesh. It was composed of a crystalline substance that seemed to drink the sterile light of the chamber and refract it into 1,000 muted colors. It was female in form, an elegant, impossible sculpture of living geology. The Syndicate's manifest listed it as Specimen 734. The technicians, in their gallows humor, called her the Glass Queen. She was beautiful and terrible, a being of silent, captured majesty. Her head was tilted slightly, her limbs held in a state of enforced stillness by the crackling containment field. Kalen watched, his hand resting on the cool metal of a guardrail, and felt a familiar ache in his leg. He knew what it was to be trapped, to have your own body become a prison. The Syndicate saw a power source, a biological curiosity to be dissected and exploited. Kalen saw a captive. He accessed the containment field's diagnostics on his personal datapad, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The energy output, the field density, the resonant frequency, it was all within standard parameters. But as he watched her, he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through her crystalline form. It was a constant, high-frequency vibration, a shiver that never ceased. It reminded him of the phantom pains that still haunted his leg on cold nights. He cross-referenced the frequency with the geological surveys of the planet. The number was a near-perfect match for the harmonic resonance of the deep core rock formations. The field holding her was tuned to the planet's song, but it was being played back as a dissonant, painful scream. They were using the world's own energy to torture one of its children. He did not know how he knew this, but the certainty of it settled deep in his gut, a cold, hard stone of truth. Protocol was clear. Observe, record, report. Do not interfere. Interference was grounds for immediate termination of contract, and on a corporate-owned world like Gehenna Prime, That was a death sentence. He looked from his datapad to the shimmering figure. The tremor seemed to worsen, a silent testament to an agony he could not hear but could somehow feel. He remembered the medics on Cygnus, their clinical detachment as they discussed amputating his leg. He remembered the cold logic of command, sacrificing his unit for a strategic objective that turned out to be meaningless. He had followed protocol his entire life, and it had led him here, to this cold, humming room, a broken man in the service of other broken men. In that moment, something shifted within him. A wire, stretched taut for years, finally snapped. With a few deft taps on his datapad, he bypassed the local admin lockouts. His old military clearance codes, long dormant, still held a few backdoors in the syndicated system architecture. He found the frequency modulator controls. It was a simple line of code, an integer that defined the harmonic pitch of the containment field. He looked at the captive creature one last time. He made a minute adjustment, shifting the frequency by a mere 0.2%. It was a tiny change, a whisper in a hurricane of data, small enough that the automated system logs might even overlook it as a calibration flicker. The effect was immediate. The violent, high-frequency tremor that had racked the crystalline form ceased. For the first time since he had entered the chamber, the being was perfectly still. The light within her seemed to soften, shifting from a fractured rainbow to a warm, steady, internal luminescence. Her head lifted slowly, and though she had no discernible eyes, Kalen felt her gaze fall upon him. A connection, silent and profound, arced across the sterile space between them. It was a feeling of gratitude, of recognition. It was the first genuine contact he had made with another living thing in years. It was also the greatest mistake of his life. The change in frequency, meant as a kindness, acted like a key in a lock. It resonated with the specimen's own internal energy, but instead of soothing, it created a feedback loop. The hum of the containment field suddenly pitched higher, rising to an unbearable shriek. Red lights flashed across the control panels, and a klaxon began to blare, its synthetic voice a brutal intrusion into the sudden chaos. Containment field destabilizing. Sector Gamma in lockdown. Security teams to deployment stations. Kalen swore, a harsh, guttural sound. He tried to reverse the change, but the system was locked, caught in a cascade of emergency protocols. The shimmering energy cage around the crystalline being began to flicker violently, spitting arcs of blue-white energy that struck the chamber walls, leaving scorched, molten craters. The being inside was thrashing now, not in pain, but in a surge of unleashed power. Heavy, magnetic sealed doors slammed shut around the perimeter of the chamber, plunging the room into the stark, flashing crimson of the emergency lighting. He was trapped. Through the reinforced observation window, he saw them coming. Captain Jorik, his face a mask of furious purpose, led a squad of syndicate security, their pulse rifles held at the ready. Jorik's eyes met Kalen's, and in them, Kalen saw not just alarm, but a grim satisfaction. Jorik had always despised him, seeing his veteran status and quiet competence as a reproach to his own brutish ambition. Sabotage. Jorik's voice crackled over the internal calm, distorted by the wailing alarm. Administrator Forlag has authorized terminal protocols. Neutralize the asset. Detain the saboteur. Kalen knew what that meant. They would try to destroy the creature, and he would be the convenient scapegoat for the catastrophic failure. They would put a pulse round through his skull and call it a closed case. His act of compassion had signed both their death warrants. The containment field gave one final, agonized scream and then shattered, imploding in a silent flash of incandescent light. The crystalline being, Lyra, as he would later come to know her, dropped to the floor. She landed with a sound like 1,000 wind chimes falling at once, her body glowing with raw, untamed energy. She pushed herself up, unsteady, her form flickering as she adapted to freedom. Jorik's team began to fire, bolts of superheated plasma splashing against the chamber walls. They were not aiming to capture. They were aiming to kill. Lyra raised a hand, and a wave of force, invisible and absolute, erupted from her. The incoming plasma bolts dissolved in midair. The security team was thrown back against the far wall like discarded dolls. Kalen didn't hesitate. Survival was an instinct carved into his soul. He saw his own death in Jorik's eyes, and an uncertain chance at life in the strange, powerful creature before him. He slammed his hand onto a manual override panel next to him, a relic of older, less automated designs. His codes, his knowledge of this facility's bones, were his only weapon. The primary lighting grid for the entire lower sector went dead. The emergency strobes died a second later. Absolute darkness flooded the chamber, broken only by the ethereal, soft glow emanating from Lyra's body. In the confusion, he moved, his limp more pronounced as he pushed his damaged leg to its limit. "This way," he hissed, grabbing her arm. It was not flesh, but something smooth and warm, like polished stone heated by a sun. She recoiled at his touch, but did not pull away. He led her away from the main entrance, toward a small, unmarked maintenance hatch hidden behind a bank of cooling conduits. It was a path that didn't exist on any of the official schematics Jorik would be using. Behind them, he heard Jorik shouting orders, the beams of their weapon-mounted flashlights cutting frantic, useless patterns through the blackness. Kalen wrenched the hatch open and shoved her through into the narrow, suffocating confines of a service tunnel. He followed, sealing the hatch behind them. They were plunged into a different kind of darkness, one thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and lubricant. The only light was her gentle, pulsing glow, casting their elongated shadows against the pipelined walls. They were fugitives, an unlikely, untrusting alliance born of shared desperation. He could feel her studying him, her silent gaze filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He felt the same. She was a being of immense power, capable of stopping plasma bolts with a gesture, yet she seemed disoriented, fragile, like a deep-sea creature dragged violently to the surface. He leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the pain in his leg a searing fire. He was an old, broken soldier, and he had just declared war on a corporate entity that owned the very air he breathed. He looked at the glowing woman beside him. He had tried to offer a moment of peace and had instead unleashed a storm. The service tunnels were a labyrinth he knew by heart. They moved through the guts of the facility, the sounds of the hunt echoing around them, the distant clang of boots on metal, the crackle of comms, the methodical sweep of search teams. Lyra moved with an unnerving grace, her crystalline feet making no sound on the grated floor. She was the light, and he was the guide, his cane tapping out a grim rhythm in the oppressive silence. They reached a junction, a vertical shaft that housed one of the main geothermal conduits, a massive pipe siphoning steam directly from a volcanic vent deep below. The heat was immense, the air thick and wet. Kalen checked his datapad, mapping their route to the surface. A secondary exhaust port, 3 levels up. It was their only chance. As they began to climb the service ladder bolted to the shaft wall, a section of the grate above them was torn away. Captain Jorik and 2 of his men stood silhouetted against the light from the corridor, their rifles aimed down. "Nowhere left to run, old man," Jorik snarled, his voice echoing in the shaft. "And nowhere for your pet to hide." They opened fire. Kalen pushed Lyra behind the relative cover of the massive conduit. Plasma bolts ricocheted wildly in the confined space, superheating the air and metal around them. He saw a stress fracture on a joint in the conduit, glowing cherry red where a stray shot had struck it. He knew the pressure ratings for this section. It wouldn't hold. "It's going to blow," he yelled over the din. He didn't know if she could understand his words, but she seemed to grasp his urgency. The fractured joint began to hiss, a high-pitched scream of escaping steam. With a final, groaning tier of metal, it ruptured. A jet of superheated steam, invisible and deadly, erupted from the pipe, aimed directly at Lyra. Kalen reacted without thought. He threw himself sideways, shoving her hard. He took the full force of the blast across his back and shoulder. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that stole his breath and sent him crashing to the grated platform. His synth fabric jumpsuit melted instantly to his skin. He could smell his own flesh burning. Through a haze of pain, he saw Jorik leveling his rifle, aiming for a final, clean shot at Lyra. She was no longer cowering. She stood over Kalen's crumpled form, her body blazing with a furious, cold light. She raised both her hands. She did not scream. She did not make a sound, but the air itself seemed to shatter. A focused sonic pulse, a solid wave of pure force, slammed into the platform where Jorik and his men stood. It didn't explode, it pulverized. The metal grating and the rockcrete wall behind it disintegrated into dust and shrapnel. Jorik and his men were hurled backward into the corridor, their weapons scattered, their bodies broken. The immediate threat was gone. Lyra knelt beside him. The light from her body was soft again, tinged with something that felt like concern. She reached out a crystalline hand, hesitating just above the scorched and ruined fabric on his back. A cool, soothing energy flowed from her fingertips, not healing the wound, but dulling the horrific pain to a manageable, throbbing ache. He looked up at her, and in that moment, the barrier of distrust between them evaporated. He had saved her. She had saved him. It was a currency more valuable than words. With her help, he staggered to his feet. The escape was still on. They climbed the rest of the way in a grim, pained silence, emerging through the exhaust port into the alien twilight of Gehenna Prime. The surface was a hellscape, a desolate expanse of jagged obsidian fields and looming, smoke-plumed volcanoes under a bruised purple sky. The air was thin and stank of sulfur. They had escaped the facility, but they had traded one prison for another. The planet itself was their new warden. Drone patrols, sleek, predatory machines, already crisscrossed the sky, their searchlights cutting sterile white lines across the black, volcanic glass. Their journey began. It was a shared ordeal, a trial by fire and stone. They moved by night, hiding during the long, bleak days in rock crevices or shallow caves, anywhere to escape the drone's unblinking optical sensors. Kalen pushed his body to its limits, and then far beyond. The burns on his back were a constant agony, and his leg protested every step with a grinding, deep-set pain. He rationed their few stolen nutrient packs, giving her the larger share, though he did not know if she even needed to eat. She, in turn, became his protector. When a rockslide threatened to crush them, she solidified the cascading stones in midair with a resonant frequency. When a patrol drone got too close, she emitted a low hum that scrambled its sensors, causing it to veer away in confusion. They developed a language without words. A tilt of her head was a question. A gesture from his hand was a direction. A shared glance in the face of danger was a bond of solidarity. He learned to read the light she emitted. A soft blue meant calm, a sharp yellow was alarm, a deep, pulsing violet was sorrow. He saw that last color often, whenever her gaze swept over the wounded landscape. She was mourning. She was mourning for her world. After days of travel, seeking refuge from a particularly violent ash storm, they found a deep cavern. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of cooled lava, a basalt waterfall frozen in time. Inside, the air was still and ancient. The walls were not bare rock, but were lined with massive, flawless crystals, similar in composition to Lyra's own body. They were safe, for now. As Kalen slumped against a wall, exhausted, Lyra moved to the center of the cavern. She placed her palm against one of the largest crystals. It began to glow, and soon the entire cavern was filled with a soft, internal light. Images began to form on the crystalline surfaces, not projected, but blooming from within the stone itself. They were visions, a history told in light and shadow. He saw a world teeming with a strange, silent life. He saw vast, crystalline forests growing deep beneath the planet's surface. He saw a collective consciousness, a single sentient being the size of a planet, living in a slow, geological timescale of millennia. He was not looking at images of Lyra's people. He was looking at the planet itself. The silicates, as she called them in the pure concepts she now pushed into his mind, were not creatures living on the world. They were the world. Then, the vision soured. He saw the first Magna Corps survey ships, metallic parasites landing on the skin of the living world. He saw the deep core drill, a monstrous violation, plunging into the planet's flesh, shattering the ancient crystal networks, poisoning the subterranean rivers of energy. The drilling was not just mining. It was murder, a slow, agonizing process of vivisection. The planet was dying. Lyra, the vision showed him, was an antibody. A piece of the planet's consciousness given physical form, sent to the surface to communicate, to warn, to plead. But the syndicate had seen only a resource. They had captured her, imprisoned her, and in their ignorance, silenced the very voice that was trying to save them. The escalating seismic activity, The impending planetary collapse. It was the death throes of a god. And Administrator Forlag knew. The final vision was a stolen data stream, a covert communication between Forlag and the Syndicate Board. The planet's death was a calculated loss. They intended to extract the thorium-rich heart of the planet's core in the final moments before its destruction, a final, ultimate act of desecration that would yield unimaginable profits. The colony, the workers, the families, they were all acceptable losses. The visions faded, leaving Kalen in the quiet, glowing dark of the cavern. The truth was a weight far heavier than his fatigue. He was not just a fugitive fighting for his own survival. He was a witness to a genocide. His small act of kindness had not started a disaster. It had merely pulled back the curtain on one that was already in its final act. He looked at Lyra. Her light was a dim, sorrowful violet. Fractures, like fine spider webs, were visible across her crystalline skin, damage from the containment field that had not healed. She was dying with her world. He slowly, painfully, peeled away the fused remnants of his jumpsuit from his back. The burned skin was a hideous patchwork of red and black. He cleaned it as best he could with a strip of cloth and purified water from his canteen. Lyra came to him, her movements hesitant. She raised her hand and gently laid it over the worst of the burns. The cool energy flowed again, a blessed relief that made him shudder. It was not a miracle cure, but it was a balm, an act of profound tenderness. As she tended to his wound, his eyes fell upon his own mangled leg. He reached down and touched the rigid metal brace that supported his knee, the source of his endless pain, the symbol of his failure. Without thinking, he looked at her, then back at his leg. It was a gesture of shared understanding. My prison. Your prison. For the first time, he was not ashamed of his weakness. He was sharing it. She responded by touching one of the fine cracks on her own shoulder, her light flickering with a shared memory of pain. In that silent cavern, two broken beings, one of flesh and one of crystal, found a common ground in their scars. The ground beneath them trembled, a deep, resonant shudder that vibrated through the very stone of the cavern. It was stronger than before. Time was running out. Their brief respite was shattered by the distant, rhythmic thud of rotor blades. A syndicate transport, flying low and fast. Kalen grabbed his datapad. The colony's public channels were a cacophony of panicked chatter and contradictory orders. But one signal cut through the noise, an encrypted, high-priority military channel. Jorik's channel. Kalen's old backdoor codes still worked. Ground teams Delta and Gamma converge on these coordinates. Jorik's voice commanded, cold and precise. She's using the planet's resonant frequencies to hide. We're going to flush her out. Deploy the dampeners. Level the entire grid section if you have to. They had been found. Kalen looked at the cavern entrance. They were trapped. He and Lyra could not fight an entire platoon equipped with sonic dampening technology that would render her powers useless. The first sonic charge detonated nearby. It made no sound, but the effect was devastating. The crystals lining the cavern walls flickered and dimmed, their internal light guttering like dying candles. Lyra cried out, a soundless scream of agony that tore through Kalen's mind. She collapsed to her knees, her own light fading to a dull, milky white. The dampeners were severing her connection to the planet, cutting her off from her very life force. Outside, he could hear the crunch of boots on volcanic rock. Jorik's voice, amplified by his helmet's external speaker, echoed into the cavern. Nowhere to hide, creature. And Kalen, your treason ends today. The administrator wants to make an example of you. Kalen looked at Lyra, weakened and vulnerable. He looked at the single entrance to the cavern. There was no escape, but there was defiance. He still had his knowledge. He still had his pain, and he would not let them win. He saw it then, a desperate, insane plan forming in his mind. The cavern was part of a larger network of lava tubes, some of which, according to the deep-level geological scans he had memorized, ran directly beneath the main drilling platform. The platform where Forlag was overseeing the final, frantic extraction of the planet's heart. He helped Lyra to her feet. She was weak, her body almost translucent. He conveyed his plan through a series of gestures and pointed references on his datapad's map. Go deep. Follow the tubes. Get to the drill. She seemed to understand, her light pulsing with a faint flicker of hope. As Jorik's team prepared to storm the entrance, Kalen did the last thing they expected. He walked out to meet them. He stood in the twilight, leaning heavily on his cane, the wind whipping the tattered remains of his jumpsuit around him. He looked pathetic, a broken man at the end of his rope. "Jorik," he called out, his voice hoarse. "It's over." Jorik stepped forward, his pulse rifle aimed at Kalen's chest. "Finally found your courage, old man. Or just your senses." "I'll surrender," Kalen said. "On one condition. You deactivate the sonic dampeners. They're causing geological instability. You're accelerating the very disaster you think you're stopping." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Jorik laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't take orders from you, traitor. But fine. Let the creature have its last gasp. It will make the kill more satisfying." He gestured to one of his men, who tapped a command into his wrist-mounted control. The oppressive, silent pressure on Kalen's mind vanished. In the cavern behind him, he sensed Lyra's light flare back to life. It was the signal. She was moving. He had bought her the time she needed. "Now," Jorik said, taking a step closer, "you're going to pay for your insubordination." Kalen just smiled, a grim, tired expression. "You first." He slammed the base of his cane onto a specific point on the obsidian ground. It was a spot he had noted on the geological surveys, a key structural weakness, a thin crust of rock over a pressurized steam vent. The impact of the plasteel cane was all it took. The ground erupted. A massive geyser of steam and rock exploded upwards, directly under Jorik's platoon. The ambush was pure, chaotic violence. Men screamed as they were thrown through the air or scalded by the blast. Kalen was thrown clear, his body hitting the hard ground with brutal force. In the confusion, he scrambled back into the cavern, into the passage Lyra had taken. The hunt was far from over, but he had evened the odds. They fled through the deep, dark ways of the wounded planet. The tremors were becoming more frequent now, the very rock around them groaning in its death throes. On the colony's public comms, which he still monitored, the panic had reached a fever pitch. The final evacuation alarms were screaming, but the broadcasts were filled with desperation. The transport ships were too few, the launch windows too short. The official evacuation plan was a sham, a cruel joke designed to save Forlag and his inner circle while the rest of the colony, thousands of workers, engineers, and their families, were left to die. It was in a small, quiet side chamber, miles beneath the surface, that Lyra showed him the final, terrible truth. She projected one last image into his mind. It was a vision of the planet's core, a vast, impossibly complex crystalline structure, now pulsing with chaotic, destructive energy. The drill had pierced its final protective layer. The chain reaction was irreversible. The planet would tear itself apart. But there was a chance, a way to stop it. The core's energy could be stabilized, its destructive fury soothed back into a life-giving rhythm. It required a regulator, a consciousness to interface with the core, to absorb the chaos and impose order. It required a mind to become the anchor in the storm. Her own energy, her very essence, was too similar to the core's. To merge with it would be like pouring gasoline on a fire. Her own form was also too damaged, too fractured, to contain the sheer force of the planet's dying scream. But a different kind of mind, an organic mind, a human mind, with its unique capacity for logic, for structure, for stubborn, unyielding will. That might work. The vision clarified. She showed him a human figure, indistinct and glowing, descending into the light of the core. The figure merged with it, and the chaotic energy subsided, the planet's heartbeat stabilizing. The vision pulled back, and he saw the figure's face. It was his own. The cost was absolute. To become the regulator would mean the end of Kalen. His consciousness, his memories, his very identity would be dissolved, his essence becoming one with the planet. He would cease to be a man and become a silent, eternal guardian, a prisoner and a savior in one final, paradoxical act. His body would be consumed, his mind scattered across a world, his only existence the quiet hum of a planet at peace. He sat in the darkness, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. His life was already a ruin. A broken body, a haunted past, a future that promised nothing more than a lonely room at the edge of civilization. He thought of the soldiers he had failed to save on Cygnus. He thought of his own long, slow decay in the Syndicate service. His life had been defined by loss and futility. Then he thought of the colonists above. He thought of the families in the habitation domes. He thought of the children he had seen in the mess hall, the ones whose parents had taught them to snicker at his limp. They were not his people. They were arrogant, ignorant, and complicit in the planet's destruction. But they did not deserve to die. The children, especially, did not deserve to pay the price for Forlag's greed. This was a chance to give his broken life a meaning that had always eluded him. It was a chance to perform one final act of service, not for a syndicate or a military command, but for life itself. It was a way to win a war not with a weapon, but with a sacrifice. The decision was agonizing, a final internal conflict that raged in the silence of his soul. But it was not a difficult one. He looked over at Lyra. Her light was a soft, questioning blue. He did not need to speak. His entire life, he had been a man of few words, defined by his actions. This would be his last. He reached for his cane, his constant companion in weakness. He held it for a moment, the smooth grip of familiar comfort. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, he set it down on the cavern floor. He gave Lyra a single, resolute nod. A pulse of deep violet light came from her, a wave of profound sorrow, but also of immense respect and gratitude. She understood. She accepted his decision. Their alliance was sealed. There was no turning back. Their path led them upward, toward the heart of the wound. They emerged from the lava tubes into the cavernous space beneath the main drilling platform. The noise was deafening. The shriek of the massive drill boring into the planet's core, the roar of protesting machinery, the shouts of technicians. The entire structure groaned under the strain of the planet's death throes. Administrator Forlag was there, standing on a high gantry, his face illuminated by the hellish red light from the bore shaft. He was screaming orders, trying to accelerate the final data extraction. Captain Jorik stood beside him, a living weapon, his gaze sweeping the chaos for any sign of interference. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Jorik spotted them instantly. There. Seal the shaft. Kill them both. Security teams converged, but they were not the only ones who had seen enough. Chief Engineer Valerius, a man Kalen had known for years, a fellow veteran who had buried his honor under a mountain of corporate credits, finally made his choice. With a roar of fury, Valerius and a handful of loyal, terrified engineers turned on the security forces. For the families, Valerius bellowed, swinging a massive hydrospanner like a battle axe. The battle was a brief, brutal distraction. It was all the time Kalen needed. He and Lyra fought their way past the struggling bodies, toward the edge of the bore shaft. It was an abyss of pure, white-hot energy, a direct conduit to the planet's soul. The air shimmered with heat and power. Jorik broke free from the melee, his face a mask of pure hatred. He raised his rifle, not at Kalen, but at Lyra. It ends now, he screamed over the din. But Valerius was there. The old engineer threw himself at Jorik, a lifetime of pent-up rage in the tackle. They both went down in a tangle of limbs, buying Kalen one final, precious second. He stood at the edge of oblivion. The power radiating from the shaft was immense, a physical force that threatened to tear him apart. He turned to Lyra. This was goodbye. She placed both her crystalline hands on his chest. There was no heat, no cold, just a profound connection. She poured her essence into him, her knowledge, her power, her love for her world, and her grief for its pain. It was not a transfer of energy, it was a fusion of souls. The pain was beyond anything he had ever known, a holy fire that burned away his scars, his weariness, his very sense of self. His physical form began to dissolve, breaking down into constituent particles of light and memory. With the last of his will, he took a step forward and fell into the light. As his consciousness plunged into the planet's core, the universe expanded and contracted. He was no longer Kalen, the man. He was a point of awareness in an ocean of raw, chaotic energy. He felt the planet's agony as his own. He felt the tectonic plates grinding, the magma chambers swelling, the crust fracturing under unbearable pressure. But he also felt the knowledge Lyra had given him. He saw the patterns in the chaos, the logic in the storm. He reached out with his disembodied will, not to command, but to guide. He found the screaming frequencies and soothed them into a hum. He took the violent pressures and distributed them along ancient, dormant fault lines. He became the calm at the center of the hurricane, the order imposed upon entropy. A wave of pure, calming energy radiated out from the core, spreading through the planet in an instant. On the drilling platform, the violent shaking ceased. The deafening roar of the dying world faded into a gentle, resonant thrum. The hellish red light from the bore shaft softened to a peaceful, golden white. Forlag and Jorik, who had finally overpowered Valerius, stared in stunned disbelief. Every warning light on every console switched from crimson red to tranquil green. The seismic activity flatlined. The planetary collapse had been averted. The world was stable. It was quiet. The silence was absolute. The war was over. 10 years passed. Gehenna Prime was no longer a place of death. It was a sanctuary. The Magna Core Syndicate, exposed by Valerius's testimony and the facility's recovered logs, had been dismantled in the biggest corporate trial in a century. Forlag and Jorik were serving life sentences in a high-security penal colony. The world was now under the joint protection of the new Interstellar Compact and a council of the remaining human colonists. They lived in small, self-sustaining settlements, built in harmony with the planet's rhythms. The deep core drill had been disassembled, the wound it created now a place of pilgrimage. The planet had changed. Strange, beautiful crystalline structures now grew on the surface, pushing up through the black obsidian fields like luminous flowers. They pulsed with a soft, gentle light and emitted a low, continuous hum, a planetary song of peace. Lyra acted as ambassador, the bridge between her world and the humans who now treated it with reverence. At the entrance to the sealed primary bore shaft, a simple memorial stood. It was not a grand statue of a conquering hero. It was not a plaque engraved with a name. It was a single, worn plasteel cane, its grip smoothed by a lifetime of pain, now set forever in a block of flawless, clear obsidian. A young woman, now in her late 20s, stood before it. She had been a child in the colony's mess hall, a child who had once giggled at the sight of the limping man with the sour face. Now, she brought her own daughter to this place. She placed a gentle hand on the cold obsidian. He was called Kalen, she said, her voice soft. They mocked his limp. They said he was broken. But when the world was ending, when the powerful ran and the brave fell, he was the one who saved us. He drew a new plan, not on a datapad, but on the heart of the world itself. The child looked from the cane to the vast, peaceful landscape. Where did he go? The woman smiled, a sad, grateful expression. He didn't go anywhere, she replied, looking out at the glowing, crystalline fields. He's still here. He is the quiet in the wind. He is the strength in the stone. He is the silent heart of our world, watching over us all. And across the whole of the planet, in every blade of grass and every glowing crystal, a vast, peaceful, and eternal consciousness that had once been a broken man felt the touch of a grateful hand and knew that his sacrifice had not been forgotten. He was at peace.